All right, the first question we have is one that I can't remember. I don't have any record of dealing with it in the Sunday night series, the live series. Although I'm pretty sure we've addressed it maybe at some point in the study of the eldership. But the question pertains to the matter of the meaning of the word children in 1 Timothy 3, Titus chapter 1. We'll just look at those passages very quick. And these texts, as we mentioned this morning, are part of those texts that deal with the qualifications for elders. But there's also in the qualifications for deacons, the word is found as well. So, for example, in 1 Timothy chapter 3, beginning in verse 4, and we looked at this verse, but not in this particular context this morning, talking about the parallel part of the submission aspect of the text, but not with regard or respect to number. And so it says, one who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. And that's Titus 3 and verse 4. Then you have chapter 3, verse 4. Then you have in verse 12, let deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses well. And so we have the word children there. And then in Titus chapter 1, we have in verse number 6, if a man is blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of dissipation or insubordination. And so, sometimes the matter arises in a study of the qualifications of elders and deacons. Does the word children necessitate that a man have more than one child? And because the word children is a plural word, and we understand that plural means more than one. And so we want to look at how the Bible uses the word children. In fact, we'll look in both Testaments. And then also look at even how we use the word in our English language with regard to, we'll use the term accommodation. All right, so the word children in this text, in these three texts, the two in 1 Timothy 3 and the one in Titus 1, is the word teknon. Okay, teknon. And teknon means child, but the rendering in these texts is the word children. It's the plural. It's the plural form of the word for child. Okay, and so I want to note. So just keep that in mind. Now I want you to open your Bible to the book of Genesis, chapter 21. Genesis, chapter 21. And we're going to look at verse number 7. Now this is the birth of Isaac. Beginning in this chapter, we have the birth of Isaac. And in verse number 6, the Bible says, and Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse what? Children, for I have borne him a son in his old age. Now, the word children in this text is plural. And yet Sarah uses the term children to describe what? Having a single child. A son, Isaac. Okay, so again, from one sentence to the next, she speaks about who would have ever expected them to say that I nursed children, for I have borne him a son. And so the word children is plural, but obviously the word son is singular. And so we see that they're used interchangeably in the same context. All right, now I want you to go back to the New Testament, and I want you to go to the book of Matthew, chapter 22. Matthew, chapter 22. And this is what is sometimes referred to as the levirate conundrum. Now, the question is actually about the resurrection of the dead. But in an argument concerning the resurrection of the dead, the Sadducees are using what is called a reference to what's called the levirate law. The levirate law is in the law of Moses. And by the way, we'll look at it, okay? But just to tell you, the levirate law is found in Deuteronomy 25. And it demands that if a man is married and his brother is living in the same area as him, that his brother has to take the widow and raise up a child to be the heir to the deceased brother's name and property. Okay? And so that's called the levirate law. That a man has to bring up a child with his deceased brother's widow. Okay, that's what's called the levirate law. So the Sadducees are invoking the levirate law in an attempt to trick or to show Jesus there can't be a resurrection. But we're not going to deal with that part. We're going to look at how they posed the question to Jesus. It says in verse 23, we're getting in Matthew 22 and verse 23, the same day the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him, saying, Teacher, Moses said that if a man dies having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. And then you go down, it just goes on to say that there were 7 brothers and they all practiced this thing. That every brother married the dead brother's wife, and then he died, and then the next one, and he died, and then nobody ever, the woman never did have any children. All right? So look at the text again. If a man dies, verse 24, having no children, that word is plural. Okay? But it says that the brother is to take the widow and raise up what? Offspring, which is singular. Singular. Okay? And so he has no children. And the brother is to raise up for him offspring, singular. Now, let me just ask a very simple question. How many children would a man have to avoid his brother having to marry his widow? Johnny? 1. If he dies having 1 child, then his deceased brother, his brother does not have to marry his widow when he dies. It says no children, but we know that only one child satisfies. Right? And so the Sadducees used the term interchangeably. Having children and 1 satisfies the answer or the matter of having children. Okay, and then in verse 25, it says, Now there were with us 7 brothers. The first died after he married, having no offspring. Singular. All right, so now let's look at what the law says that they're quoting. Okay? Let's go back to Deuteronomy 25. Deuteronomy 25. and look at the levirate law. Deuteronomy 25 and verse 5. If brothers dwell together, remember that's why I said if they're living in the same area. If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall go into her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. All right, so looking at this text, it says, he dies and has no what? Son or offspring?
Mine just says child.
Child.
Mine says no child.
Having no child. So we have the word child, we have the word son, we have the word offspring, which are all legitimate renderings, of the word. And they're all what? Singular, right? Child, son, offspring. And so when the Sadducees invoked this law, they spoke of one child as having, if a man had one child, it's proper to say that he has what? Children. He has children. If he has one child, he has children. All right? And so note that Jesus didn't try to correct them in their use of the language. They used the language children, plural, offspring, singular. And so Jesus did not accuse them of misrepresenting the text, because we all understand how the language works in these cases and how it works even in our own cases. All right, I want to go to one more passage back in the book of Matthew. Just kind of drive the point home. In verse number 29 of Matthew 19, Peter asked the question, Lord, we have forsaken all and followed you. What's in it for us? And Jesus said, verse 29, and everyone who has left houses or brothers or sister or father or mother or wife or children or lands for my name's sake shall receive 100-fold and inherit eternal life. Does this promise apply to a person if they only forsook one child? In other words, one child satisfies the text. All right? And so we understand both the Greek and the Hebrew language allow for the inner use of the word child and children. All right? Or that a single child satisfies the demands of having children. All right? Now, we can use this exact same and we do use this exact same practice in the English language. I'll just give you an example. Would it be right for me to say that John and Tammy have no grandchildren? I'd be lying, but how many do they have? They have one. If they have one, they have grandchildren, right? Yeah. And by the way, what would you think of me if I said that and then I said, well, I said children. I said grandchildren. I meant more than one. We would understand somebody's trying to play games with words, right? Trying to be cute or deceptive. And by the way, and the same applies. The same would apply to the idea of children. We would never say that Zach and Tasha don't have children. But how many do they have? One.
It just don't sound right to say John and Tammy has grandchild.
Yeah, they have grandchild.
Or Zach and Tasha has child.
They have child. Yeah, because the language allows for us to use that terminology to describe one or more than one. And by the way, essentially every language does this. But Well, I wanted to show, first of all, that both the Old Testament language and the New Testament language use these terms interchangeably in the same way that we use the term interchangeably in the English language. And so, a man who would serve as an elder or as a deacon, if he has one child, it satisfies the demands of the text. Even though the word children is used there, we understand that one child meets the demand of the text. And this is another one of those areas where some of our brethren haven't been very discerning in their application of that principle. Kind of like I was talking about this morning with the qualifications being parallel. And we've made an application here where you cannot possibly make it over here. We haven't in some cases not done a very good job. In other words, to object to a man serving as an elder or deacon because he only has one child is just not very good. Just not very good Bible usage. It's just not good. It's not right. Number one, it's not right. But number two, it denies the type of language that the Bible itself uses, and the language that we all use every single day. And we all understand exactly what we're talking about. All right, anybody have any questions or additions, thoughts to that point?
The law in Deuteronomy, what happens if both, so say he had two brothers, what happens if both of them are already married?
No, it doesn't matter.
It don't matter?
It doesn't matter. Even if the man is married, he still has. You have to remember now, you could take more than one wife in those under the Mosaic law, and that even if he had a wife, the law required him to raise up an heir or offspring for his brother. Okay, and by the way, if we went on reading through the book of Deuteronomy, if a man refused to do that, it was bad on him. They'd bring him in front of the whole group of men, and the woman would say, "This man will not perform the rites that God demands of him." And then they'd ask him, "Is this true?" And if he said yes, if you'll read the text, it says she would take his shoe and spit in his face. And that from that day forth, he would be called the man who had his shoe taken. In other words, to us it sounds silly. But in those days it meant something. But in front of all the elders of the family or the town or whatever, he had to give her his shoe, and she spit in his face.
It still means something in the foreign countries.
I don't know anything about the practice now. Let me just mention one thing in connection to this. This practice of the levirate law was going on hundreds of years before the law of Moses commanded it. Let me give you a quick look at, for example, in Genesis 38. Look at Genesis 38. And we all understand this is pre-Mosaic law, right? Now we're not talking about the children aspect, we're talking about the practice that found its way into what is known as the levirate law. All right? Genesis 38 and verse 6. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. Next verse. And Judah said to Onan, "Go in to your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother." But Onan knew that the heir would not be his, and it came to pass when he went into his brother's wife that he omitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore he killed him also. So then the account gets even crazier in that Judah told Tamar, put on the garments of widowhood and wait until my next son is old enough to marry you, and he'll perform the duty of Ur. And then he didn't keep his promise, and then he inadvertently had children by his daughter-in-law. Tira and Perez, I believe, or Zerah and Perez. But you know, we're talking about way ahead. I mean, these are the original sons of Jacob. These are the original sons of Jacob, and so this thing was practiced long before it became a part of the Mosaic law. And by the way, incidentally, what was being practiced in Genesis 38 was also not only being done by divine authority, it was being done by divine edict. You know, he killed Onan over this thing. The Lord killed Onan over this thing. And so this was a practice way back before the law of Moses ever enjoined it as a part of God's written law. Okay, and so this just shows us the text, etc. All right, so any other questions? By the way, this seems so foreign to us. I mean,
What I was talking about a while ago was the throwing of the shoe as a sign of.
I thought you was talking about the levirate law.
You know, President Bush had one.
Yeah, you throw your shoe at somebody, it's a great insult.
Saddam Hussein, they did that to his
That's what,
statue.
see, that is true. Even today, that is true.
What's that?
When that guy threw his shoe.
Oh yeah. The throwing of the shoes is an insult.
That is a big deal.
Yeah. In certain parts of the world.
And even if you just show the bottom of your foot.
Right. Yeah, a lot of societies don't want you showing the bottom of your feet.
This goes back.
Yeah. But this practice of the levirate law seems so strange to us. And yet it was commonplace for thousands of years, essentially, from the earliest days, of human existence and civilization. All right, second question is, and I've had this one in the queue for a long time, and I'm glad I'm finally getting to it. And the question is, should the 6 days of creation be understood literally? Should they be understood literally? And the answer to that question is yes. They should be understood literally. And I'm going to make the case. I'm going to make the case for that in a moment. But I want you to understand something. When you understand the days of creation literally, there's no way the earth is millions of years old, much less billions of years old. All right? It means that the earth at most is about 6,000 or 7,000 years old. All right? And by the way, there is no scientific evidence that says that the earth is billions of years old. If you want to make assumptions and put assumptions into your calculations, then yeah, you can make the earth millions or billions of years old. But there are a million contingencies. For example, they talk about if the earth is billions of years old, how is it that we are seeing stars that are thousands of light years away or millions of light years away? Of course, the answer is seen in the book of Genesis, that God put the stars in the sky. When He created them, it's called. It's not a theory. It's God made the world mature. He didn't. When God wanted trees to be on the planet, He didn't plant acorns. He created trees. He created full-grown animals. Everything was created in a state of maturity, including the sun and the moon and the stars. All these things were created for us to be seen from the very moment of creation. Because in Genesis 1 it says, I'm going to put the stars and everything up here in the heavens, and you can see them, and they'll be for you for times and for years and for seasons. In other words, there was a cycle in the galaxy, so to speak, or in the universe, that allowed people to, for example, know when a year had passed, or to know when a season, certain, because this is something like, when I think about I always think about Philip, because Philip, man, he loves looking at stars, and he would know, and Walter loved to look at the stars, but they could tell you. Now you can't see this one at certain times of the year. You can't see this one at certain times of the year. And so, Genesis even tells us these things, and Moses wrote Genesis, and tells us that these things are given to us, and we can see them from the moment they were created. All right. So, are they understood to be understood literally? And what really got me on this is, man, there's a guy that's online, and he does a lot of good work. His name is William Lane Craig, and if somebody was going to ask me, pick one guy on the planet to prove the existence of God, William Lane Craig would be my guy. He's my guy. All right? But he's not the guy I want to talk to about the age of the earth. Because as brilliant as he is, he has made some really foolish arguments trying to argue against a young earth. And I was watching one day, and he basically said, trying to mock the idea of a young earth, he says, was it just some type of here's the term he used, and any of you all under about 40 are not going to get it. You might not. Was it like some type of claymation show? Raise your hand if you don't know what claymation is. All four of y'all need to raise your hand because none of y'all know what claymation is. Do you know? You don't know what claymation is?
Is it not where they make the clay things and you move one hand and then you take the other shot and you move?
That's exactly what claymation is. Gumby is claymation. Gumby is claymation. By the way, just you can go online, go on YouTube and type claymation and click on one, and you can actually see the fingerprints in the clay. Every time that thing moves or is altered, you can see the fingerprints that people put in the clay as they were changing. But used to clay, that's how like cartoons kind of the next step up from cartoons was claymation. And if those of us that are old enough to remember, we could watch a tree grow in claymation, right? All of a sudden it comes up and it sprouts out, and there's a tree in about 3 seconds. And Craig was trying to mock the idea of a young creation by referring to the creation of trees as if it was a claymation. Because the Bible says that the grass and the trees sprang forth from the earth. All right? And that was his argument. Was it claymation or was it just accommodative language? And I immediately remembered the plagues. Because the plagues talk about lice springing forth out of the dust, right? And it's the same word. It's the same word and concept as the creation. What kills me about Craig is this. He believes that God created everything, but he doesn't believe he could do it in 6 days. I've never understood that.
Frogs.
The frogs coming up out of the river. Right. Yeah, but they can't go. But but they're brought. Right. But the locust.
No one knew that they were coming.
Yeah, the locust came in from a wind, but the frogs came right up out of the river. And the lice sprang forth out of the dust. In other words, life came from non-life in an instant, in mass numbers. And it's like, does William Lane Craig not believe the plagues?
When it says that he spoke it into existence, God takes it to that. You can't speculate. You can't. No.
Yeah, the Bible says he spoke it into existence.
He said, "Let light be,"
Right. And it's exactly the way it says. Because when you read Hebrews chapter 11, it tells us that God created everything out of nothing. It says that everything that we see did not come from things which could be seen. In other words, God didn't take something and make the earth out of it. He just literally spoke it into existence. Okay? And so, but I want to look at the idea of this claymation idea. I've done some research, for example, in Genesis 8 and verse 17, it says, "Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with." Bring out. There's that same idea there in Genesis 8:17. Then Exodus 8:18, bringing forth lice. The earth brought forth grass. It's the same thing. And so it happened not necessarily in an instant of time, but it came forth and was mature in what would essentially be an instant in time. I mean, you get a full-grown oak tree in about 3 seconds. That's essentially an instant in time. Something that would take 100 years to do on its own. All right? But I want to know the word day, because that's an important word. The word day in our Old Testament is the Hebrew word yom. If you were just Y-O-M, if you were to put it in English, yom. All right? And the word day appears in a lot of different contexts. By the way, we use the word day in a lot of different contexts, right? Because old people say, back in my day. Are they talking about it back in my day as a specific 24-hour day? Or are they talking about a period of time? You're talking about a period of time, yeah, in the past, in my day. The day will come. Well, okay. So we use the term day in a lot of different ways. But we also use the term day to refer to 24-hour day. All right? The Bible does the same. And when you find, and there are two qualifiers on this, okay, which I think is important. When you see the word day, number one, you should understand it as a literal 24-hour day, provided, number one, it's not in prophetic literature. Like where 7 days is not literally 7 days. All right? But then secondly, if there is a number value assigned to it in non-prophetic literature. The evening and morning were the what? First day. All right? So you got that number designation. And you also have it in evening and morning. In other words, it's describing evening and morning, and then it gives it a number value, first day. First day. Evening and morning were the second day. And so the Bible makes some pretty express statements about what's being said here. Okay? And another thing we have to remember is don't let the detractors say, well, those people were just so backwards and so ignorant of how the world works that they couldn't possibly understand the idea of a day meaning literally 100 million years. Right? And the people that will tell you that that's the case still can't tell you how the pyramids were built. Right? The people that will tell you that can't explain how some dude is still almost completely intact after he's been dead 4,000 years. Right? And so let's not talk about the people in the people that lived in Egypt in the old days as being ignorant, because they did things that we still cannot duplicate or explain to this very day. Right? And so we have that. But then we also have the fact that God guided the writing. And we also know this. Those people understood the concept of eternity. Right? I mean, didn't the people in the Old Testament talk about living with God? Going to heaven and living with God? Well, if you have some concept of eternity, then you can certainly have some concept of any number of years between today and infinity. So, again, these were not a bunch of knuckle dragging, Neanderthals. These were some of the most sophisticated people in a lot of ways that have ever lived. All right? And so we don't want to let people dismiss these folks as just simply being, ignorant or unaware or unable to comprehend these types of concepts. Because it's just, again, when you tell me how they built the pyramids and when you tell me how they embalmed those guys, then we'll talk. Then we'll talk. And of course, nobody has the answer to those things. And so when you have in a non-prophetic setting the word day, especially when it has a number designation, it should be understood as a literal 24-hour day. All right? The same Moses that wrote Genesis 1 wrote, "For in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that in them is," right? And then he rested what? The seventh what? Day. That's a 24-hour, that is a 24-hour day. All right? And so you have the use of the language. All right? Secondly, if the days are not literal 24-hour days, then the phrase "in the beginning" becomes essentially meaningless. In the beginning. Because, that's the first 3 words of the Bible, right? In the beginning. And the New Testament makes repeated references to "in the beginning." Right? For example, in John chapter 8, Jesus described the devil, says he was a murderer, a liar and a murderer from the beginning. Well, what was Jesus talking about? He's talking about the time frame of Genesis 1, 2, and 3. He was talking about that time frame. He was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. Matthew 19, in the discussion of marriage and divorce and remarriage. Why did Moses command us to give her a certificate of divorcement and put her away? Well, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to put away your wives, but from the beginning, it has not been so. He made them male and female in the beginning, or from the beginning. And so the Bible uses the phrase "in the beginning" repeatedly in the New Testament to refer to that express point in time. Now look, I understand that an infidel, an unbeliever, a skeptic, an atheist, whatever you want to call them, they're not going to accept the biblical testimony of "in the beginning" to refer to Genesis 1. But we need, look, there's no telling how many people are walking around in Marion County who are professed Bible believers who think the earth is billions of years old because they've been spoon-fed that on television and children's shows and in the schools.
It's beginning to be less and less popular than it is from the original creation.
That is exactly right, Kyle. There are more and more highly educated individuals who are abandoning this idea.
Matt Walsh, she's a full-time conservative Catholic. He does not believe in the original creation. And Ben Shapiro the other day, and it's odd for me because Shapiro.
Yeah, Shapiro's a Jew, and he thinks the earth is billions of years old.
Yeah, he said something about the earth being so many billions of years old. And that's an odd thing to say for a man who claims to be a Jew.
Right. He doesn't even believe his own book. I mean, that's the crazy thing. He doesn't believe his own book. And it's like these guys think that they're going to lose all their cred if they embrace a young earth. In other words, because look, Ben Shapiro's smart. I mean, and anybody that ever listens to him and thinks that he's not smart, they're not smart. Because that dude's crazy smart. All right? But just because you're crazy smart doesn't mean you can't make dumb arguments. Because William Lane Craig is crazy smart. very well read, very reasonable, very, a great thinker, a great debater. But his argument about spring forth was just ludicrous. And I think sometimes these guys think that if they give up on this old earth idea, that they immediately lose their credibility in every case. Jordan Peterson was one of those guys. Jordan Peterson would never say he believed in God. But you would hear him talk, and you knew in the back of that dude's mind, he was like Saul of Tarsus, man. It was just working on him. And then finally, he just had to give in to what he knew to be right. And by the way, it didn't hurt his street cred. That's all he wants to talk about is the Bible. Now, I don't think he's given up on the ancient earth part of it. But my point is that there are highly intelligent people who are giving up or abandoning the idea of no God in favor of an intelligent designer. And then there are others that are abandoning the idea of an ancient earth because the evidence just doesn't point that direction.
I don't think it would have been hard for, like you said, for an infidel to believe in the young earth. It probably wouldn't be that hard to believe that way if there wasn't so much recent so-called science that forces everybody to think the other way.
Right.
I mean, to me, if you were not conditioned to believe one way or the other, I don't think it would be that hard to think that there was in the young earth.
Right.
It's no more hard to believe that than it is something between
20 billion years old? Yeah, I mean, why is it so hard? Yeah, but I guess, if we can get people to embrace the idea that there is a creator, an intelligent designer, and then we can get them pointed to by the way, science will point to that. Because they say it's impossible to describe the intricacies of a single cell. That a single cell is not a single cell. It is a conglomeration of machines all working together inside one single cell. And it's infinitely detailed. And there's no way, there's zero way that thing ever happened by accident. Like, look, listen to Stephen Meyer. Listen to Stephen Meyer and those guys talk about irreducible complexity. That's the terminology for that. A single cell is so unbelievably complex that it is impossible for evolution to have created it. But the terminology is irreducible complexity. And so the 6 days of creation, look, we have nothing. We don't have any reason to hide from that. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit, just for one reason, because our young people. Our young people, you need to understand, the Bible's pretty clear on this. And there's nothing to be ashamed of by saying you believe that what the Bible says about the age of the earth. Now, if you're going to talk about it, you probably need to do some reading. And I don't mean just reading the Bible. I mean you need to read some others that have written that talk about the earth being young and the evidence. Some of the evidences for that. And I have tools all in my office, on my computer. Lots of things I could give you to help you in that respect. All right, I'm not going to deal with my third. I'm going to mark this third question off because we're about 20 after or so. And we still need to take care of Lord's Supper. Does anybody have, before we close this session out, does anybody have any questions or comments about either of the questions, but particularly the second?
I know that
Neil deGrasse Tyson?
He's very popular right now.
Yeah.
But he was on a podcast with some guy that was some form of a believer in a creator. And he, of course, deGrasse, he's not.
Right.
He can explain everything. And in his attempt to persuade this guy he was wrong, he said, he told him that if you will grant an evolutionist one miracle, they can explain every step of the
Yeah, just give me one miracle and I'll explain the rest of it. It's a great line. It's a great line. They got to have their one miracle and then we'll take it from there. Look, Neil deGrasse Tyson is a legend in his own mind. He's not that sharp. He's not that sharp. He's about like Bill Nye the Science Guy. Not that sharp. All right, let me turn this off. All right, let me find us a song here.